Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Callahan, our General Counsel. Very nice to see you all, and thanks for joining us today with our special guest. And before I introduce our guests, we have a little reminder about what is the mission of the LinkedIn Speaker Series that I've been asked to talk about, which is, of course, to bring inspiring ideas and innovative thinkers, like yourself, who will make our employees and members more productive and successful. A quick reminder to everybody that you can share this talk with your networks at #InSpeaker for the series, at Sen Gillibrand for Senator Gillibrand, and #Off the Sidelines, all caps, for the Senator's new book. Before we begin, I'd like to extend a special welcome to some local officials who are kind enough to make time to come out to LinkedIn today for our event. So if I'll introduce you, please stand up and give a wave. First, our home mayor here in the city of Mountain View, Chris Clark. Margaret Abe-Koga, city council member from Mountain View. Thank you. Mike Kasperzak, also city council member, Mountain View. Tara Martin-Milius, city council member, Sunnyvale. Terry Tygeson from the Menlo Park City School District Board of Trustees. Christine Padilla, Congressman Eshu's field representative and president of the Commission on the Status of Women for San Mateo County. Hello. And Ellen Kamai, policy aide for Santa Clara County Supervisor Sumitian. Hi there. So I'm delighted now to introduce today's special speaker. And I've had the pleasure to know Senator Gillibrand for several years and seen just how terrific she has been as a congresswoman, a senator, and really as a person. We had a personal interaction once where we were at a fundraiser for the senator, and my 10-year-old daughter unexpectedly asked a question from the back of the room. And someone said, the young lady in the back has a question. And I couldn't believe when I heard my daughter's voice. But the way you took the question in terms of engaging with it as if you was a CEO answering the question was terrific and showed a lot about character. And she remembers that to this day. So thank you for that. She's 12. So the official bio for Senator Gillibrand, born and raised in upstate New York, the senator learned from her grandmother very early on, who was active politically, the values that guide her public service to this day around hard work, idealism, honesty, and bold action. As a congresswoman, Senator Gillibrand pledged to be open, honest, and upfront in a way that the New York Times recognized as a quiet touch of revolution. In Washington. Shortly after being elected to the Senate in 2009, you led a national campaign to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and this year have established a national recognition for fighting the Pentagon over how sexual assaults are prosecuted in the military. Time magazine recently named you as one of 2014's 100 most influential people in the world, and the New York Daily News places you number 4 on its recent list of the 50 most powerful women in New York. And the senator resides in Troy, New York, with her husband Jonathan and her 2 boys, Theo and Henry. And so that's the official part. Now I have to ask the unofficial LinkedIn introduction for everybody, which is, what's not on your profile that we should know about you, and can you demonstrate a special skill or talent?
Yes, there's many unknown things. One unknown thing is that my Chinese name is Lu Tiana. And when I studied in Beijing as a student, we went to the beach and got terrible food poisoning. And the anecdote I was given by the hospital person was toad venom, and I drank it and survived. That's not in my bio.
All right, that's a good one. And what would you like to do for a special skill?
I have a lot of special skills, so I'm going to let you guys choose. I'm very good at tennis and squash, so I'm happy to teach you a forehand tennis swing or a forehand squash swing. I also was a tap dancer at age 10, and I'm happy to show you my dance I performed at age 10.
Audience vote? Sounds like tap dance.
Okay. So I don't really remember it, but I'll do what I remember. So I was 10. It was to Ain't She Sweet, and I don't have tap shoes on, but I'm going to do it. So shuffle in like this. This.
Wow, right on. That was excellent.
And I wore a very cute pink outfit. It was very good.
We could picture it. I think that's perfect. Thank you for that. So congratulations on all the success with the book. And so I guess to start off, sort of what's the premise of Off the Sidelines and what inspired you to write it now at this point in your career?
Well, I wrote the book because I wanted to create a national conversation about why women's voices matter. That every woman, because her life experience is different, because her worldview is different, that those differences are actually good. And if she's heard on the issue she cares about, she can actually change the outcome. So it doesn't matter whether it's your local PTA meeting or school board. It doesn't matter if you've survived some horrible trauma and want to hold schools accountable on how they treat sexual assault. It doesn't matter what the issue is, but that your worldview is important, and if you are heard, you will change outcomes. I wrote it now because I have really been working in the trenches on this notion that women really do need to be heard politically, that 2010 was the first year in 30 years the percentage of women in Congress actually went down. And I kept watching the same old battles that our mothers and our grandmothers fought and won being fought again in Congress, whether it's access to reproductive health care or whether women should have access to affordable contraception, something that should be a foregone conclusion. I can't believe that Congress can't move on. And I believe that if Congress was 51% women, we wouldn't waste a day debating whether you should have access to contraception. 98% of American women take it. It would be decided long ago.
And so that's a good segue to, it's much more than a book. It's really a movement that you're trying to put together. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit on the mission and where you see it going in the next few years.
Well, you know, when Random House asked me to write the book, they said, we love your Off the Sidelines campaign. Would you bother to tell your story so other people could understand it? And I thought, you know, different people do read books, and a lot of women, young women, aren't really that interested in politics. So if I could write this book now to create this call to action, a national call to action for women to be heard, it could have really strong impact in every boardroom, in every company, in every community. Because it doesn't matter where you sit or what you believe, it's just that your views are really different and they're not being heard. In Congress, there's only 20 women in the Senate, it's only 18% in the House. So women's voices really aren't rising to the top. In corporate America, only 3% women are CEOs. Only 16% of corporate board members are women. So, but women have an impact. If one woman's on a corporate board, that company's 40% less likely to restate their earnings. That is a huge fact. When women are on, and when you have diversity on corporate boards, returns on investment, returns on equity are higher. So women do have something to say. It's really meaningful. And if we can, you know, create a call to action like Rosie the Riveter was. If you remember Rosie, she was just an iconic advertising campaign. She was a woman with her hair in a kerchief and sleeves rolled up, slogan, "We can do it," and it asked women to enter the workforce. And they responded. 6 million women entered the workforce by the end of World War II to help with war industries. And if I could create a call to action that resulted in 6 million more women voting, or 6 million more women holding these elected leaders accountable, or 6 million more women advocates, we would really accomplish something.
There's a concept that we talk a lot about here at LinkedIn, which is around the idea that relationships really matter. And throughout the book, you talk often about different relationships that you've had at different stages of your career as a lawyer or your career in the Congress and the Senate. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how that's been important to you and what relationships you have now and how you see those developing in the future.
So I talk about those relationships in two places in the book. One is about mentors and role models and sponsors, about your career, and how for women it's so valuable to have a role model. It's so valuable to have someone who gives you that right piece of advice just at the right time. And it's extremely valuable if you have somebody who sort of adopts you and takes your career as something that they are going to fight for and be responsible for. I never had the benefit of a sponsor, but I had a lot of mentors and a lot of role models. My strongest role model in politics was my grandmother. And she just, for whatever reason, as a secretary in our state legislature in Albany, really believed that women's voices mattered. And even though most elected leaders were men, she organized other women to be heard on local politics. And they did all the door-to-door work, all the envelope stuffing, all the campaigning, and they were the voice of the grassroots. And I learned from her fundamentally that women's voices matter, that what you do with your time matters, that grassroots advocacy matters. And then I had other role models and mentors. Hillary Clinton was one of the first, she was the reason why I got off the sidelines. I remember when she went to China as our first lady, and she gave a speech about women's rights being human rights. And I remember watching, because I was an Asian studies major, and so I studied in Beijing, and I knew how powerful it was to give that message from our First Lady from that stage to the world. And I was most upset that I wasn't invited. It's like, why am I invited? And I realized I wasn't invited because I wasn't involved in politics. And so that's what really got me to wake up as an adult to get more involved in politics. And over my career, Hillary's been a mentor. She's given me bits of advice every stage, and those bits of advice, by the time I was an elected leader, only added up to less than 90 minutes. But it matters, because each one of us have someone who's further down the rung than us in their career, and you could just know, you can see that young woman making the mistake you made, or not believing in herself, and giving her that little bit of help or support at that key time can make the difference in her career. And I really had that from Hillary Clinton.
And the difference between kind of mentors and sponsors and how you think about that, how does that play a role in how you think about it?
Well, a mentor, I mean, there's a lot of people that study this stuff, and what I've read is that a mentor is just someone who gives you advice. It's very simple. It doesn't have to be, you know, very complex. When I, for example, saw a young woman who wanted to, who worked on my first campaign, she wanted to get a job at the Clinton Global Initiative, I sat down with her and she said, you know, Kirsten, I really want to work on this childhood obesity initiative. I said, well, you know, what job are you applying for? She said, I'm applying for this #2 job. And I said, well, who's your boss? And she said, oh, they haven't picked the boss yet. So I said, well, why aren't you applying for that job? And she said, oh, I'm sure I'm not qualified. I'm sure I don't know enough. And I knew, my head nearly exploded. I said, first of all, you know more than enough. You're very qualified. You're one of the smartest people I know. You know everything about this subject. And they're going to hire somebody to be your boss, and you will know more than they will. It'll probably be a guy, and you will be kicking yourself. And I said, you have to promise me you will apply for that top job. And she did, and of course she got it. And now she's managing a whole new initiative for the Clinton Global Initiative. And she's doing great things, but she just needed that little bit of advice at that moment for me to say, own your ambition. Believe in yourself. Go for the job you really want. And it mattered to her. So mentoring is just a little bit of advice when you need it. It doesn't take a lot, and we should all do it. We should do it for anyone who's finding their way. And for men, you know, giving some mentoring advice to women is super helpful. You don't feel like you're bound by your gender. But women really respond well to it and need it. In terms of sponsoring, sponsors, you know, something I wish I had when I was a young lawyer, just somebody who really wanted me to be partner, somebody who really wants you to see you reach your full potential. For whatever reason, you've done a great job for him or her, you've shown your skill, they believe in you. But when you have a sponsor, that person aligns themselves with your career. So if you fail, it's going to make him or her look bad. If you succeed, it makes him or her look good. So that's a much more intimate relationship where someone's fighting for you. It's rare. You're not going to have it everywhere you go, but you should definitely aspire to it because it will help enormously. And that's about relationships. And what I didn't know as a young lawyer is that relationships mattered. I was building all these great relationships with these partners because they used to ask me to play tennis all the time. But I got nervous, and I thought, oh, God, what happens if they think I'm too, you know, fun-loving and sporty and not smart and serious? And so I stopped playing tennis. Well, that was stupid, because if I kept playing tennis and those partners got to know me really well and saw, wow, she's tenacious, she fights hard, she's the kind of person I want at my company forever, they would have fought for me. They would have been my sponsors. But I divorced that relationship because I was afraid that I wouldn't be received well or I wouldn't seem smart enough. Typical rookie mistake, but we all make it, because unless someone's giving you that little bit of advice, I had no one to ask. And the other women that I knew well at the firm, they weren't partners either. And so we tried to help each other as best we could, but nobody knew the secret recipe. And relationships are very much part of that secret recipe. Later in the book, I also have a chapter on friendships. And one of the things that I refer to as the third leg of the stool. You know, your job's one leg, your family's the other leg, and the one that actually keeps the stool standing are your friends. Because if you don't have someone to, you know, kick your heels off, let your hair down, complain about your husband, complain about your job too, you're lost. It really is hard if you don't have that friendship to rely on. So I really encourage women and girls to keep your friendships close. They're really important to you.
That's great advice. You mentioned the complaining about your husband part. One of the things that
I love my husband.
I'm sure. One of the things that struck me in the book was how open you were personally about the decisions you went through and how it impacted your husband and his career and how you thought about that and your family. And I was surprised that you were that open. But maybe you could talk a little bit about why that was important for you in the book and more importantly in the broader career that you have and others have.
Well, the idea behind it was that if you're not willing to tell someone what was difficult, what you didn't get right, what the mistakes were that you made, they're not going to be able to relate to you, and they're also not going to be able to learn from what you've learned. And so I really wanted to write a self-helpy book. I wanted to write the kind of book I would love to read, because every time I read a biography, I'm always looking for the advice. I'm saying, when I read, the book about Margaret Thatcher, Iron Lady, I wanted to know, how did you figure that out? Or how did you know what to do? Or what got you to there from here to there? And they're never there. The answers are never there. And when they are, I'm so grateful. So I just decided if I'm going to write this book, I want it accessible. I want it to be something that everyone can see themselves in each story. They can see what I learned, see how hard it was, see themselves, but also be able to overcome those challenges. And I share the stories about guys who were jerks to me throughout my career, because I don't care about the guy who was the jerk. What I care about is the woman who's reading it and sees what happened to her in that story and believes that, number one, she's not alone, and number two, she can push past it. She can make partners. She can be that guy's boss someday. That it doesn't define you, and you don't have to feel so undermined, because I felt undermined. When I was a young lawyer, my boss, instead of thanking me for all my hard work and all the vacations I canceled and all the weekends I worked, tells the group that I have a great new haircut and I look fantastic. You couldn't have undermined me any way worse than what he did. I felt valueless. I felt all that work and all that effort, you're not even congratulating. You're talking about something irrelevant. And he was trying to be nice. I get that. He was trying to be charming and funny and whatever. But when you're 20-something and you're starting out your career, that's the last thing you want to hear about, because you want to be valued for your efforts and who you want to be and what you're striving for. So that's why I bothered to include those stories, because I want people to see themselves and understand this happens to everybody, and it's something that you can certainly overcome.
That's great. And in terms of being somebody who is forward-leaning and pushing forward, as you mentioned, along with mentor sponsors, you talk a lot in the book about taking advantage of opportunities to speak up and to tell your story, and some funny anecdotes about interactions with the president. Maybe could you talk a little bit about why in your current career, where to many of us it would seem you've got all the access you want to be able to speak up, how does that play into your daily life?
So the whole notion of the book is that women's voices and everyone's voices are really important, and I wanted to share stories when even I'm afraid to speak up, and that typically happens. And I'm a pretty, as a young girl, you could definitely have called me bossy, and I was certainly opinionated, and I was always quite pushy. But that doesn't really matter when you're about to talk to the President of the United States, because he's the biggest boss there is, and it's very intimidating. And regardless of whether it's a Democrat or Republican, it doesn't seem to matter. When George Bush was the president, I could have, yelled at him about Iraq and the axis of evil. There's 100 things I disagreed with him on, but when I met him for the first time, I just said, "Thank you for your service." Missed my moment. But that was also very early in my career, and I really didn't know my full potential. So it was more when, under President Obama, when I had chances to talk to him at the Christmas party, or at a drinks with the members of the Senate, I had to really realize, you're getting 2 minutes with the president. If you don't use that 2 minutes, you're not doing your job. And it's awkward, because you don't want to be a pain in the ass. Nobody wants to be the pain or the annoying one or the one that's always bothering me about something. You want to be the one that's liked. But sometimes the causes that you're fighting for are so important, you have to push past that. So I remember one White House Christmas party when we were fighting so hard for the 9/11 health bill, and I was really trying to get support, and I needed the president's help. I needed him to help me find a Republican senator to help me pass the bill. And so I'm stressing out about this, because I'm dressed all in my big gown, and I'm getting my picture with the president at the big party. And when I'm nervous, like my chest gets really red and I get all flustery. You could just see it. So I get up to the president. I was like, "Mr. President, it's really important, this 9/11 health bill. And if you could just call Senator Enzi and tell him that it's really important." And he just starts laughing. And he's like, Kirsten, Merry Christmas." So sometimes it doesn't go over well. But we can find our moments when we can to be heard. And they're sometimes rare and not often. But it's hard for all of us. So you just try to gather up your strength and make the best case you can, because your voice really makes a difference, and that moment might be the only moment you get.
And it's clear when you talk about those interactions how passionate you feel about some of the causes that you've advocated, and we talked a little about that in the introduction. Can you talk about the empathy that you feel you bring to the role in leadership? And we talk at LinkedIn a lot about compassionate leadership, and that's a theme throughout the book about your constituents and how you feel about some of the causes you brought. But that's a powerful part. Maybe you can talk about that.
Well, one of the lessons I learned, and I didn't know it, I really didn't know this, when Secretary Clinton was elevated to become Secretary of State and I was appointed to fill her seat, one of the issues she had been working on was the 9/11 health bill. Now, the 9/11 health bill was about our first responders. It was about these men and women who raced up those towers when everyone else was coming down, who worked so hard to find survivors, then worked hard to find remains, but did this awful cleanup, and the government told them the air was safe. They breathed in these toxins and now are dying of horrible cancers. And so I had to take this bill on, and what I understood at the time was that my colleagues weren't really interested, and that they really felt this is a New York issue. New York's a wealthy state. We're not going to do anything. And I didn't understand why they could have so little empathy. But I talked to some colleagues, and Mary Landrieu gave me great advice because she had worked so hard. Go, Mary. She had worked so hard for Hurricane Katrina survivors. And I sat with her and I said, Mary, how do I make our colleagues care about this? How do I move this bill forward? And she was very precise. She said, Kirsten, no one is going to care unless you show them why you care. I thought, wow, that is true. I haven't really told anybody why this affects me and why I care. And in order to do that, you have to understand who you're fighting for. And you have to spend time with them, hear their traumas, hear their challenges, hear their pain, and not only feel it, but feel it as intensely as they do. And so once I was able to begin to do that and to meet with these first responders and hear their heartbreaking stories, I began to realize these were men and women who were dying who were my age. They had 2 little kids, like my little kids. Their lives were being cut in half because no one protected them, because they were the fearless ones, because they were the heroes. And I thought, what an injustice. And so the more I embraced the challenge and the more I let myself express those feelings, I even gave a speech on the Senate floor, and I read a letter from a man who had died, and it was to his wife about all the loss and how painful it was. I started to cry, and I thought, oh my God, I've just ruined my Senate career. You're not allowed to cry on the Senate floor. But when I finished, a young staffer came up and said, you know, I've been here a long time, and I've never heard a speech as powerful as that one. And I realized that's what's missing in Washington, just raw emotion, raw urgency, empathy, and passion. And so it's powerful. So I tell those stories because I want advocates, regardless of the issue you care about, to embrace your intense feelings. Embrace that anger, embrace that fury, embrace that sadness, whatever it is that's driving you to do something, that's powerful, and you shouldn't suppress it.
That's great. And when you mentioned your boys, it reminded me of a lot of stories you had in the book about them coming to the Capitol with you, and the concept of family first. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what you've drawn from your experiences in putting family first in your role, and what you've learned from your boys through that.
Well, when I was first elected to the House, we had an orientation, and I sat on the House floor, and a very old member of the House came out and started to talk to these new freshmen. And he said, most members of Congress are divorced. He said, most members of Congress, their children hate them or don't speak to them. You are the only person that can prevent this from happening to you. You have to stand in front of your 22-year-old scheduler and tell her no. You have to put your family first, protect them, and make sure you build a life that's consistent with who you want to be. That scared the heck out of me. And I'm thinking, this is not good. Maybe I will not fit in here. This is not a place I necessarily want to be. But you have to, for anyone in their career, whatever it is, you have to create a space for your family. Because if you don't, no one will. And so for me, what that meant was building a schedule that was consistent with being a working mom, and not taking meetings before 9 a.m. so I could bring my kids to school, not taking meetings between 5 and 7 so I can pick them up, make them dinner, get them to bed. Now, I have the benefit of flexibility. I have enormous flexibility compared to most parents in the workplace, and that flexibility is an enormous blessing. So my challenges are nothing compared to the woman who's going to clean this auditorium, who's working double shifts at the emergency room, who's a bartender at a local bar. She's given her hours. She doesn't have flexibility. She can't bring her kids to work. She may not even have sick days. And if you don't have that kind of support, you can't succeed, because the day your kid's sick and you miss work, you will likely be fired. If not fired, you certainly aren't going to be promoted. And so I talk about this whole debate. You know, we talk about the having it all debate. It's such an absurd debate because, first of all, the word having drives me crazy. What are we having? Are we having a party, having a vacation? What are we having? We're not having anything. We're doing all of it. And the all pits women against each other, saying that a woman who stays at home doesn't have a full life. So it's an absurd frame. We should really talk about what are the realities of doing it all, because most women work. Most women have to work. They have to feed their families. 8 out of 10 moms are working. 4 out of 10 moms are primary or sole wage earners. So if you're not supporting them with things like affordable daycare or universal pre-K or paid leave or equal pay for equal work or a living minimum wage, she can't provide for her kids. And that's not who we are as Americans. We believe you work hard every day, you make it to the middle class. That's the American dream. It's not true for low-wage workers today. So we all have to build a life consistent with our families, but we should also make it a lot easier for women who have no support and no flexibility so that they can build a life consistent with their families too.
So in order to make that a reality and making things easier, you make the point that there needs to be more women and diversity in corporate boards and in Congress and other leadership positions. The topic of diversity is a very active one now in Silicon Valley and for LinkedIn and companies trying to do more to advance diversity. And the institution that you're a part of is historically probably one of the least diverse out there. You would be the notable exception and 19 others. What can you talk a little bit about how you think about diversity and how Off the Sidelines plays a role in trying to drive for that?
Well, I think it's the diversity of our life experiences that are so rich. It's what's most powerful. It's that our worldviews are different, that our perspectives are different. So different issues are raised. And I give one example from Congress. When I was first elected in 2006, I was 5 freshman women were placed on the Armed Services Committee. And it shifted the gender balance of the committee very, very significantly. And it changed the conversation. So one example is we were having hearings on military readiness, and the men asked questions that were typically asked in those hearings about how many ships, how many guns, how many aircraft, and really talked about what the equipment would look like for readiness. But the women had a very different line of questioning. Gabby Giffords, who had a base in her district, said the doctor in her base said 70% of the men and women going back into combat weren't mentally ready. And I amplified that line of questioning by saying, why is the divorce rate and the domestic violence rate and the suicide rate higher than it's ever been in the history of the military? What are you doing about PTSD and traumatic brain injury? And so the combination of those two conversations about equipment and personnel is a much more holistic view of what's military readiness. And so it's the combination of those male and female voices that's so powerful. And so that's why when boards have diversity, they perform better. It is the difference of perspectives. And that's what, frankly, makes our country so strong. And that's why immigration reform is so important. Because, again, having those diversity of views throughout our economy creates greater strength.
And what specifically do you think brings to the table when the difference of having female leaders versus male leaders?
Well, in my short experience in Washington, and it's not true of all women, and it's not true of all men, but oftentimes the women legislators really can leave the partisan politics at the door. They really strive to be friends first. We have these quarterly dinners where we get to know each other and celebrate each other as women, as mothers, as daughters, and it's very, very positive. And so it makes us interested in each other and interested in each other's successes. So every time I've ever passed a piece of legislation, I've had a strong Republican woman helping me. And it's because we start first on what we agree and build from there. We actually try to lead by consensus. We try to find common ground. We often are very good at listening and finding where that commonality lies, and that makes for very strong legislating. So I often say if we had 51% of women in Congress, it would be a functioning place. More would get done because you'd have more people who are not constantly competing with one another, to have their names on bills, to get the credit, to be in charge. More people just focused on, let's get it done, let's make a difference, let's do our jobs. And it's obviously not true of all women, and there's many men who have these great qualities too, but it's often present in our female colleagues. So those are different leadership skills, different different perspectives, and it's useful, I think, in finding common ground.
So I'm going to do one more question, and then we're going to open up the floor for Q&A. So be thinking about your questions. We talk about next play here at LinkedIn. You've had tremendous success as you continue to build a national reputation. What's next for you, Senator?
Well, I hope to stay in the Senate for a long time. I want to pass my sexual assault in the military bill along with the sexual assault on college campus bills. I really want to be able to refinance student loans. I want to do tax reform. There's a billion things I want to accomplish. And so I'm going to keep fighting hard and using this platform as a place to make a difference and to create these national debates and hopefully encourage more women into public service.
That sounds great. So at this point, why don't we open it up to audience Q&A.
Thank you so much for being here. My question's a little bit silly, but I'm really curious. So between House of Cards, Scandal, and Veep, which show is the most accurate depiction of what really goes on in Washington?
Veep.
Really? Just a one-word answer?
Yeah. So I think Veep is more realistic because it is that ridiculous and it is that funny.
Okay.
I love the way she finds humor in reality, because no one senator or candidate is as ridiculous as she is, but she has a piece of all of us in her. And so I see it all the time in different scenes and episodes where I have seen my colleagues do exactly what she does. An example. So the first episode of Veep, she has to give a speech and she's short. So she wants a carton put in front of the podium as a box. And so she's shouting at her staff, "Box me, box me." I've seen 2 female senators do that before. So there are all these little truisms in there that are hysterical, and I love it. So I love that show. House of Cards is realistic in terms of the way deals get made behind the scenes. It's just much darker than reality. I don't know any Congress people who've been killing people, so. But some of the machinations seem to reflect, and I've never seen Scandal, so I can't speak to Scandal.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for being here, Senator Gillibrand, and I want to thank you for being an inspiration to my sisters, my cousins, and my mother, and women all across the world. You've been a great leader for our country.
Thank you.
I just got done reading a book by Michael Ignatieff. He was a liberal of the Liberal Party in Canada, and he came from Harvard and went back to Canada to run for office. And he said, you know, he had never been so well dressed when he looked in the mirror, but he had never felt so empty. You know, I think there are similar feelings amongst a lot of politicians in Washington. I wonder if you feel the same cynicism at times. What are your thoughts on this cynicism? How do you deal with it, this idea that things aren't getting done?
Well, you know, I aspire to public service because I want to make a difference. And I believe that God's given me so many blessings in my life. He's given me a great education, a loving family, wonderful children, a supportive husband. I live in a great country. I couldn't have more blessings. And so I feel like my responsibility in life is to make a difference for others. And so regardless of the ridiculosity of Washington and the inability of sometimes my colleagues to do anything productive, I feel like I have a mission and I have a real vision for what I want to accomplish, and I have a real commitment to fighting against the status quo and fighting against the lack of empathy and the lack of leadership on some really important issues of right versus wrong. So I can keep myself going because I really care, and some days I feel depressed and some days I feel like I can't possibly go another day, but then I just remember who I'm fighting for and what they've gone through and how horrible it must be for them, and if I can raise their voice up and speak for them, then I can make a difference.
Thank you.
Hello. I've got some questions coming in from the stream. There's
Great.
Several employees around the country watching. So any tips on how to reach out to possible mentors? How do you figure out if there's no one to ask or if you're just not seeing the opportunities available?
Well, you really have to earn your mentors. So the way to find a mentor is work really hard for somebody and then ask them for advice at the right time. So anyone can be a mentor. Anyone in your work life can be a mentor. Sometimes just someone who's older than you can give you that good bit of advice because they've been there, done that. They might not be at your firm, they might not be at your company, they might not be even in your industry. But you should ask people for help and ask them for guidance. You don't have to necessarily follow it, but there's nothing wrong with informing yourself to know what does someone else think and how would they handle this situation. No one's going to be your mentor if you just say, will you be my mentor? Doesn't happen that way. They will be your mentor because you've sort of earned it and showed them that you're awesome. And so they say, you know, if you're looking to get that next big job, let me give you a couple of bits of advice. They're going to offer it. They're going to reach out to you. And you just have to keep working hard and recognize when someone's there to give you a little bit of help to not only accept it, but ask for it at the right time. Certainly sponsors are much harder to find, and you might never get one in your career, but it's wonderful if you can earn it, because then it makes your life often a lot easier.
Okay, great. And if there's other questions, please come in line. I have a couple other coming in on the stream too.
Okay.
Actually, a couple asking about your views on immigration reform.
I think it's an imperative. I think it is not only an issue of basic fairness and a civil rights issue, but our country was based on immigration and immigrants. The richness of our culture, the richness of our diversity is what makes us strong. And so we need comprehensive immigration reform. And the Senate bill is decent. It's not perfect, but it's decent. And it has a couple provisions that are very important. It has a pathway to citizenship for everybody that's here. It's really important for the first day people to be able to buy into Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and pay their taxes so that they are fully being able to benefit from all that America has to offer, but also actually contributing towards that as well. It's very important that it has different industries in terms of visa restrictions to make sure that, you know, for all the great, brilliant minds that we're desperate to get who graduate from Stanford and MIT, that they can actually stay in our companies and not have to go abroad to work for our competitors. The fact that certain industries like agriculture are absolutely dependent on immigrant workers, that there can be a pathway for those citizens, for those applicants. It's really important. It's an economic engine. It is a huge untapped economic engine, and it's good for our economy long term. So it's frustrating because the House won't even debate or pass any bill, but we have to keep trying. And that's, again, to the principle of the book, that if people raise their voices and demand action, it will happen. It just has to happen everywhere.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. I really appreciate the honesty and the vulnerability today in your talk, so I appreciate that a lot. My question revolves around how we in Silicon Valley can get more involved with national issues. I think there's a stereotype, which is people in Silicon Valley want to change the world, they'll do it with tech. People in DC want to change the world, they'll do it with policy, but we kind of operate in separate spheres. Are there opportunities to work together on issues that we care about? Are there examples of places where you've seen the two cities working together well?
Well, we really needed you on healthcare.gov.
There were some Google people there and some tech people there.
Yeah, we really did. So, yes, I completely agree with you. And when industries believe that they can do what they want to do without engaging in Washington, it doesn't go well. So, you know, we had the massive financial collapse. I don't think a lot of the financial services institutions believed that they needed Congress for anything. They worked with their regulators, but they weren't really engaged. And that changed because they realized the world will be very different and that we have to be part of these discussions to figure out how to make it stronger. I think that the same thing happened with the PEPA-SOPA debate, where there was legislation and there was hearings and there wasn't a word from the tech community until it was almost passed. And then all of a sudden folks said, oh my God, this bill's not so good. There's problems here. That constant engagement and conversation is really important so that we get the laws right, so that we don't regulate or legislate in the wrong direction, so that we understand fully all the implications, and particularly in an industry that's is driven by innovation. You're changing the world every single day. You're changing your ambitions, your goals, the products you're designing, and Congress doesn't do things that fast. So there needs to be collaboration so that when we do regulate, we regulate well, that we right-size our efforts, that we don't overextend, that we don't have unintended consequences, and it happens all the time. So I think the collaboration is essential, and it would be amazing if government could have even 1/10 of the innovation that Silicon Valley has, because we're really so old school on so many levels, and it sometimes holds us back. So I think the more folks here can get engaged in politics and get engaged in policy work, the better the country will be for it.
Great, thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming. My question's twofold. So I think, in my opinion, a lot of women don't go into politics for the same reason. They don't speak up for themselves. Women notoriously have a hard time championing for themselves. So one, and I apologize, this might be in your book. I haven't read it yet.
No worries.
One, what is your advice to women who are having trouble championing for themselves and for their causes and for their leadership abilities? And two, how did you overcome that and decide you wanted to go into politics if you ever had that fear?
Oh, I totally had that fear. So, so Hillary's the one who really woke me up, because when I went to my first political event, she spoke to the crowd and she said words that totally resonated with me. She just said, decisions are being made every day in Washington, and if you are not part of those decisions and you don't like what they decide, you have no one to blame but yourself. And when she said those words, I really felt like she was talking right to me, and that I was the one who had to do something about it. And I hadn't admitted up until that point that politics was important to me, or that I really wanted a life in government service. So I had to realize my own ambitions over time and not be afraid to say I want to run for office. Because like a lot of young women, I thought that was arrogant, or I thought that was conceited or self-centered and somehow unattractive. But I really wanted to serve, and it took me a while to even when I was at campaign training classes, when I was trying to consider running for Congress, I was embarrassed to stay up and say I want to run for Congress. I just couldn't get the words out. And we often experience that because, you know, women are often very concerned about what people think about us, and we want to be liked, we want to be likable, and so being aggressive or wanting to be in charge may not be likable in our minds. So I have a whole chapter on owning your ambition, that ambition is not a dirty word, because I want women to not only aspire to whatever they care about, but I want them to know that those aspirations are good and they should own them, and that it's not about them. It's actually about their goal, their ideal, what they want to accomplish. So if you want to be engaged in advocacy, think more about the cause you're trying to champion. For example, let's say you care deeply about childhood obesity. Well, you care deeply about those kids who are not going to reach their full potential because they'll be made fun of in class, or they don't sleep well, or 100 other challenges they're going to have because they're obese, because their parents don't understand nutrition, because no one ever taught them nutrition, whatever it might be, or that they're being fed just terrible foods in school. So I would recommend to any woman who wants to be an advocate to think about who they're fighting for. And then that frees you of thinking about yourself. You care about those kids. You care about helping them. And then you're powerful, because you know, I could fight for them because they certainly can't speak for themselves. They're 10, they're 6, they're 4. So that's what it's about. It's about your cause. And that often can empower you to do more than you ever thought you could do, because you care about those kids more than you care about yourself.
Thank you.
Hi, Senator. It's an honor to have you here. I had the pleasure of actually reading your book prior to your visit. So incidentally, we do actually have something in common, which is pretty cool. We had the same childhood nickname at home.
Which one? Loudmouth, Mouth, yes, or Foghorn?
Well, mine was also Loudmouth, which was shortened to Mouth.
Unbelievable.
Yes, yes, really
Was
incredible.
it your father who used it?
Both my mom and my dad.
Outrageous.
I became known for that on the lacrosse field too, which is hilarious. But I wanted to talk about the repealing of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You mentioned kind of acquiescing to Joe Lieberman a little bit in that decision in order to get this legislation passed, in order to make this difference, instead of really gaining and taking that credit. Can you speak a little bit about, especially for women, the importance of taking credit and kind of trying to figure out when and how to do that the best way?
So when I was, I really felt, let me back up. So a girlfriend of mine called me and said, will you meet with this guy? I represent him. His name's Dan Choi. I said, sure. So I sit down with Dan, and he tells me about his life, and he tells me how he has served in the military, gotten all these accolades, trained troops and done amazing things, extraordinarily brave. But he then tells me that when he fell in love, he had to hide who he loved from everyone he cared about, everyone he served with. And he felt like all the reasons he joined the military about character and pride and integrity didn't exist for him, because he had to lie to everyone around him about who he loved. And he said it undermined everything he cared about the military, and he eventually couldn't serve anymore. And it was a heartbreaking story, because I couldn't imagine myself not being able to tell people around me about my husband or my kids or what my life is like. And I thought, God, what a horrible thing we're asking men and women to do in the military, who are literally willing to die for this country, but we're saying no based on who they love. So I took on this cause of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and I really started to work hard at it, trying to find out who the champion was, and I assumed there was a bill. There was no bill, because the only champion we had was Ted Kennedy, and he was dying of brain cancer. So I took on the cause and started polling my colleagues and saying, do you support this repeal? And some said stupid things like, is this really important? Or this is so inconvenient right now. And I'm thinking, civil rights inconvenient? This is the civil rights cause of our generation. And so I pressed on, and I found more allies than I thought we had. And I asked Chairman Levin to hold the first hearing, and he said he would, and he did. And it was amazing, because Admiral Mullen said that he thought Don't Ask, Don't Tell undermined the integrity of the whole military, which was the most powerful testimony we could have got. But throughout this advocacy, I was really getting pushback from the White House, and I didn't understand it. I was like, I don't understand. Like, this is a great cause. We should totally repeal this bill. It's corrosive. It's bad for military readiness. It's hateful. And I finally realized they didn't want me to be in charge of it. They thought I was too junior. They thought I wasn't on armed services. I didn't have enough experience. And that was so upsetting initially. I thought, are you kidding me? Like, I'm a senator too. I can do this job just because I'm new. But what they wanted was a moderate, someone who was really perceived as a moderate, because they really felt that to get the Republican votes that we needed, we would need that sort of level of that background and that ability to somehow garner Republican votes. I felt I could get the Republican votes regardless. Anyway, I decided that if they needed a moderate, that my job would then be to get the moderate. So I spent the next 3 months bugging Joe Lieberman almost every week. Joe, you need to drop the bill. Joe, the bill's written. You got to drop the bill. Joe, this is really important. If you don't do it, I'm going to do it, and the White House is going to be mad. So finally, Joe does it, which he cared deeply about it. He just had to get his legislative ducks in a row. And once he sponsored the bill, Susan Collins co-sponsored the bill, good things began to happen, and it really worked. And my job was to be the advocate. And so I was making sure people told their stories. I had a whole online story project so people could be heard on this issue and really let America know what it was really about. And so I was just, the nudger in chief. I was the one doing this. And most senators would never have done that. Most senators would have said, nope, my way or the highway. My name's on the bill. It's my idea. I'm in charge. And what you would lose in that is a really powerful champion, which is the White House. It's very helpful to have the White House care about your bill and push it forward on whatever levels they can. And so sometimes you can't be in charge. Some days you're not going to get the credit. But public service is about serving others. It's about the causes you're fighting. And if it's about you, you're going to lose. If it's about you and you getting credit and you being in charge, you won't be successful. And that's one of the biggest problems with Washington. Too many people care about themselves. Too many people care about being in charge and getting credit. And that is the wrong approach. And so in corporate America, in developing your own leadership, sometimes you're not going to get the credit. But you've worked hard. The colleagues around you know you've worked hard. The people who are working with you know how good you are. Sometimes you don't need the credit. You just do what you think is right, and you do what you think is important. And sometimes women are good at that, and that's a great skill, and it's a great asset, and you shouldn't feel bad about it. You don't have to get the credit every time. And I think people see hard work, and I think people do know when you've earned something. And most people will say, why do we pass Don't Ask, Don't Tell? They'll say, because Kirsten Gillibrand really cared, and she fought really hard for it. My name was never on the bill.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for being out here. It means a lot to a lot of us that you've flown so far just to come chat. So I have a question that's both very general and very specific at the same time. There have been a number of questions about how to muster up the courage to get involved in politics, muster up the courage to take the first step. But what happens when you're actually ready to take that first step? What's the best way to get access there? So I'm actually from the East Coast, and I have an ex-girlfriend there who are still on very good terms. I actually bought her your book when I found out you were coming to speak. And she went to Russell Sage College, so immediately huge on women's rights. Oh, yeah. And she was also roofied and raped on my alma mater's campus, RPI. So she feels very strongly about specifically your rape on college campuses bill that you're trying to push through, and desperately wants to get involved with politics in general and specifically with your administration. For people with interest in general, once they've mustered up that courage, and again for her as well, what is that first step? How does she get there?
Well, it depends where you want to make a difference. So for example, if she wants to help us advocate for this bill about how colleges should handle sexual assault on college campuses, she can work with us, because the movement was started by young women. It was 2 women knocking on my door in the Senate saying, we need to meet with the senator. She's doing all this work with sexual assault in the military. But the same thing's happening on college campuses. And their names were Annie and Andrea, and they came right in and told me their stories, how they were raped brutally, how they reported the rape, how they were disbelieved and then blamed and retaliated against by their schools. And so instead of just accepting it, they've turned into amazing advocates and champions and are going across America standing with other men and women. She can join that movement. She can help accomplish the goal of getting real legislation passed, and we will welcome her support. If somebody wants to run for office, it depends what they want to run for and where they're running, but they're always allies. And what I benefited greatly from was doing a campaign training school, just going to the local, Emerge is in California, it's amazing, and you sign up and they train you over many, many weekends, and you become part of this group of women who are going to do great things, and you have the support network. And so educate yourself, do a training, work on somebody's campaign, find what you want to, where you want to excel, what you want to do. And all the people you meet along the way are the people who are going to help you. Those are the people who are going to host the fundraisers for you and go door to door with you. So start where you're most interested, and don't be afraid to ask for help, and go to the training schools, because they will give you the nuts and bolts about how to get from A to B in a really helpful way. But if you want to give me your ex-girlfriend's phone number, we'd be happy to take her information.
She would love that. She should be the one here asking that question.
Yes, well, tell her she's brave and strong, and we will help her voice be heard.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
That's terrific. Thank you. This has been an amazing privilege to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me. And thank you all for coming. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And I want to give you one chance. So is there a final message that you'd like to leave us with today?
Be heard. Your voice is so important. You have no idea why you are where you are today or how your voice will make the difference. But believe me when I tell you, it does make the difference. And we are all placed in a certain place at a certain time, perhaps to be that voice. So don't be afraid to share your views.
Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.